Look up. That was the instinctive reaction of millions of people across Israel last night. Within seconds, streets, balconies, and rooftops filled with people staring at a sky that suddenly looked less like night and more like a battlefield. What appeared above them was not the familiar arc of a few rockets. It was something far more unsettling. A moment that forced military planners around the world to reconsider how modern missile defense actually works. The footage quickly spread across the internet. At first glance, it looked almost surreal. Bright streaks rising into the sky and then suddenly exploding outward. Hundreds of glowing trails spreading across the darkness like a giant metallic umbrella. Some viewers compared it to fireworks. But for missile defense experts, that image represented something far more serious. The moment a key assumption behind modern air defense systems was suddenly challenged. Stay with me, because what happened may not be just another episode in a regional conflict. It could signal a turning point in how wars are fought in the 21st century. And before we go further, if you enjoy deep analysis like this, the kind that explains not just what happens, but why it matters, take a moment to subscribe and leave a like so more people can see this breakdown. For decades, missile defense systems have relied on a simple principle: detect one incoming missile, calculate its trajectory, and launch an interceptor to destroy it. One threat, one response. Systems like Patriot, Arrow, and THAAD were designed around that equation. But the weapon used in this attack changes the rules. A cluster missile launches as a single projectile. Radars track it normally, interceptors launch normally, and everything appears to follow the expected pattern. Then, seconds before interception, the missile opens. The outer casing separates, and suddenly hundreds of submunitions disperse in every direction, each falling independently toward the ground. In that instant, the defense system faces a completely different problem. What began as one target becomes hundreds. By the time the system recognizes what happened, the intercept window is already gone. The interceptor hits the empty shell while the submunitions continue descending. That is what people saw above Israel. The moment when one missile effectively turned into an entire barrage. And this is where the implications begin to expand far beyond the battlefield. Interceptor missiles used by advanced defense systems can cost millions of dollars each. A single cluster missile capable of releasing hundreds of submunitions may cost only a fraction of that. If dozens of interceptors are needed to counter one launch, the financial mathematics of defense quickly becomes staggering. But the missile attack may only be one part of a much larger picture. Shortly after the strikes began, reports emerged that Iran had targeted a major data center in the Gulf region, infrastructure connected to global cloud networks. At first, that might sound like just another target, but data centers are the backbone of modern economies. Financial transactions, logistics systems, artificial intelligence platforms, and communication networks all run through them. Striking such a facility sends a message that the battlefield may no longer be limited to military installations. Some analysts now warn that this could be only the first phase. Phase 1 involves missiles and physical infrastructure. Phase 2, according to several strategic assessments, could involve cyber operations targeting power grids, financial systems, and communication networks far beyond the immediate conflict zone. And while missiles were lighting up the sky, another development quietly began unfolding in global finance. Major investment institutions across the Gulf, sovereign wealth funds controlling trillions of dollars, have reportedly begun reviewing their exposure to the United States. For decades, oil revenues from the region have flowed back into American financial markets, supporting what economists call the petrodollar system. But geopolitical tensions can shift financial behavior rapidly. Even a small change in those investment flows could have enormous consequences for global markets. Meanwhile, another question is circulating among analysts. How were some of the recent targets located with such precision? One theory involves satellite intelligence. Over the past decade, China has dramatically expanded its network of Earth observation satellites, capable of monitoring vast regions of the planet in near real time. If that information were being shared, directly or indirectly, it could represent a significant shift in the balance of intelligence power that has long favored Western alliances. And this is what makes the current moment so unsettling for policymakers. Several developments appear to be unfolding at once. new missile tactics challenging air defenses, digital infrastructure becoming a battlefield target, financial alliances beginning to shift, and potential intelligence partnerships reshaping strategic advantages. Conflicts rarely stay confined to the place where they begin. Military pressure can trigger economic reactions. Economic shifts can reshape alliances. And technological changes can expose weaknesses that entire defense systems were never designed to face. And if all of those forces begin moving at the same time, the consequences could extend far beyond the region where the first missiles appeared in the sky. 5 days ago, many observers assumed the escalation in the region would follow a familiar script. Several days of strikes, quiet diplomacy behind closed doors, and eventually another fragile ceasefire. But what is unfolding now looks far less predictable. Instead of a short cycle of tension and de-escalation, analysts are starting to wonder whether something deeper is shifting. Military deterrence is being questioned. Digital infrastructure has suddenly become a battlefield. Financial alliances are quietly being reassessed. And intelligence advantages that once seemed unquestionable are now being challenged. The speed of these changes is what concerns strategists the most. Before we go further, if you're following this breakdown and want more deep analysis like this, take a second to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video. It helps these long-form explanations reach more people who want to understand what's really happening behind the headlines. Because the events of the past few days may only be the opening phase of something much larger. Military planners in Tehran are already discussing what comes next. Financial institutions across the Gulf are evaluating decisions involving trillions of dollars. Intelligence agencies are scrambling to understand how new technologies and new alliances are changing the balance of information across the region. And in Washington, policymakers are facing choices that could shape how this entire crisis evolves. What happens next may not just influence a regional conflict, it could affect the structure of global power that has existed for decades. And that raises a difficult question. If the foundations of that system are starting to shift, how far could those changes go before the world fully understands what has begun? Because once the initial shock fades, analysts begin asking a far more uncomfortable question. What if the missiles, the strike on digital infrastructure, the financial tension in the Gulf, and the growing intelligence competition are not separate events at all? What if they are connected signals, testing several pillars of modern power at the same time? Military defense, digital infrastructure, global finance, information dominance. When pressure appears across all four at once, governments rarely panic publicly. But behind closed doors, the tone of the conversations changes very quickly. For decades, deterrence in the region relied on the assumption that advanced missile defense systems could protect cities and critical infrastructure. But saturation tactics, where a single launch releases dozens or hundreds of submunitions, change the equation. Defense systems do not simply need to intercept a missile anymore. They must intercept everything it releases. And that turns defense into a costly mathematical race. At the same time, another layer of vulnerability has appeared: digital infrastructure. Modern economies run on systems most people never see: server farms, fiber cables, cloud networks, financial data centers. When even one of these nodes becomes a target, the message is clear. Future conflicts may extend beyond battlefields into the very nervous system of the digital economy. And then there is the financial dimension. For decades, global finance has revolved around structures that seemed almost permanent. Oil priced in dollars, sovereign wealth funds reinvesting energy profits into American markets, U.S. Treasury bonds acting as the deepest pool of global capital. But financial systems depend on confidence. The moment investors begin questioning stability, they quietly start exploring alternatives. China has spent years building financial infrastructure capable of settling major energy transactions outside the dollar system. Cross-border payment networks, yuan-denominated contracts, and alternative development financing mechanisms are expanding slowly but steadily. No one expects the global financial order to change overnight. But the real question now being asked by investors and central banks is more subtle: whether the incentives that supported that system for decades are gradually weakening. Finally, there is the intelligence dimension. Precision strikes require information: satellites, signals interception, surveillance networks, geolocation analysis. For years, the United States held a decisive advantage in these areas. But satellite technology is spreading rapidly. New constellations now provide detailed observation capabilities to multiple countries. And artificial intelligence systems can analyze that data faster than any human network. When you place all these shifts side by side, military saturation tactics, attacks on digital infrastructure, financial recalculations, and evolving intelligence capabilities, a pattern begins to emerge. Not the collapse of the existing system, but the slow redistribution of leverage across several domains at once. Meanwhile, political pressure inside the United States continues to grow. Conflicts that begin with promises of quick resolution often evolve into complicated engagements with uncertain timelines. Military operations consume resources, markets react to uncertainty, and public opinion gradually divides. Decision makers in Washington now face a dilemma: escalate and risk widening the conflict, de-escalate and risk losing credibility, or maintain the current course while the strategic environment keeps shifting beneath them. And while attention focuses on the immediate crisis, other global powers are watching carefully. Economic partnerships across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East continue expanding. Energy agreements, infrastructure projects, and technology cooperation are growing quietly in the background of geopolitical tension. The longer instability continues, the more attractive those alternative partnerships may appear. So look at what happened in less than a week. A new missile tactic demonstrating how defenses can be overwhelmed. A strike reminding the world how vulnerable digital infrastructure is. Financial institutions reconsidering geopolitical exposure, and analysts debating whether the intelligence battlefield itself is becoming more evenly distributed. Each of these developments alone would be significant. Together, they begin to resemble the early signals of a larger geopolitical transition. And that leads to the most important question of all. Not what happened yesterday, not even what happens tomorrow, but what kind of world begins to take shape if these trends continue? Will missile defenses adapt quickly enough to counter saturation attacks and drone swarms? Will cyber operations become the primary method of disrupting economies without traditional warfare? Will global finance gradually evolve toward a system where several currencies compete for influence? And will intelligence advantages once held by a few nations become widely shared through satellites and artificial intelligence? These are the questions governments and investors are now asking quietly. Because history rarely changes direction in one dramatic moment. More often, it shifts through events that seem disconnected at first, until later they appear as the first pieces of a much larger transformation. Write your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to keep following how this story develops, from military movements to financial and technological shifts happening behind the scenes, subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video. Because the lights that appeared in the sky over Israel may disappear from the news cycle quickly, but what they revealed could influence global politics, security, and economics for years to come. And somewhere, in strategy rooms across several continents, people are already preparing for what they believe comes next. The real question is whether the rest of the world is ready to understand just how important this moment may become.